Hi everyone, and welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. Today we are diving into the world of comedy with an author who has worked on some of television's most beloved shows. Stan Zimmerman is here with us today to talk about his book. It's both funny and poignant. It's called The Girls, From Golden to Gilmore. Stan, thanks so much for coming by. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to talk to you. I'm just loving all the books and all the colors.
I know.
So someone that, I would do it like this, color coordinated.
Yes,
It's
yes.
like
You would do it just like that?
Just like that.
Okay.
So a little control freak in a good way, yes.
Well, we like it too, thank you. So you are a writer, you're a producer, you're a director, now you're an author. Tell us a little bit about your book, The Girls.
Well, I kept getting asked the question, how could a guy like me write for all these women? And it started out being, just the Golden Girls, but then it started to be a pattern with Roseanne and Gilmore Girls, and just that I was always attracted to writing for women. And then it got me thinking, I've always had best friends would always be women from a young kid. And I just like being around women. I think also as men, we're trained not to emote or really talk about our feelings. So as a writer, that's hard to write for. And I found women were just more verbal, and I really enjoyed writing for that.
So in the book, you talk about all the shows that you've worked on. Let's start with The Golden Girls. It was such a huge hit. It was pretty...
But not at the beginning.
Yes, and people didn't expect it to be a hit, right?
Well, back then, a show about 4 older women in Miami, I mean, that was just not the culture back then. It was very Three's Company and women that looked like that. So although everybody knew they were really great actors, they didn't think it'd become such a cultural phenomenon that we're still talking about it today, and it still has relevance today.
And so you were pretty early on in your career with that show.
It was the second staff job that we had, but we were just brought on to write 1 episode, and they loved it so much. They really appreciated a first draft, and as a writer, to be able to come on and write a good first draft, that's what all writing staffs need, because you're on the outside. You're not sitting there day to day, but we were able to capture the characters, because the minute we got the assignment, we went to every single taping, and this was all before it was on the air. So that was the only way we got to know who the characters were, and then suddenly it came on the air, and every week, we were on staff by then, they would say the ratings, because there were no computers back then. Think back, way back when.
Back in the dark ages.
No computers, yes. I think we're using probably typewriters. I don't know, those people don't know what those are. But, so they would say what number we were in the ratings. So it'd be like, oh, we're number 18. And everyone would be like, oh my God, that's fantastic. And then it would go up and up and up to 1. And we just couldn't believe it.
And again, because you were early on in your career, that had to feel like, wow.
Thank you for being a friend.
I knew it was special. I don't know why, but I just stopped myself at every point of it just to take it in and appreciate it. And maybe that's our Midwestern upbringing. I think it is something about being from Detroit and growing up like that, that you really do appreciate everything that you had. And I did take that moment because I had grown up watching Maude and B. Arthur and Betty White on Mary Tyler Moore Show as a little kid watching. Let me stay up till 9 o'clock to watch it. And here I was on the stage with them, and they're saying my lines that I thought of.
That you wrote. I mean, it had to be.
Well, luckily I had a writing partner. We would just pinch each other. We're black and blue by the first episode because we were here doing it. And then to be there, and it's filmed in front of a live studio audience, so there were all these people laughing at our lines being read by those ladies. It was just, we had a couple of out-of-body experiences.
I'm sure, and we should mention, so you have a long-time writing partner.
James Berg, who I met at NYU. I came here to be an actor to NYU in New York. What I thought was my path, because I was going to do that since age 7, and I just loved acting. And I auditioned to get into NYU, Circle in the Square program, and then a friend introduced us, and we made each other laugh on the street, and we said, he was in a writing program. He wanted to be a journalist, so we come to it from those perspectives. And we just sat down one day, and he's like, you love TV, I love TV. I want to write pilots. Why don't we write a pilot? We didn't know what pilots were. We didn't know really how to write a sitcom. And we started writing during NYU, in between classes and after-school jobs. Got an agent in New York who didn't handle TV writers, only newscasters. A young guy, and took us on and started to get our scripts out in LA.
So going back to those early years, one of the other things you said in the book, Stan, was that even working on what was thought of as a more progressive show, you had to stay closeted.
People find that shocking because Golden Girls is such a progressive show, but you have to, again, go back in time, and back in those days, for whatever reason, and I've been looking back on it from the perspective of today and questioning what would have really happened if somebody had found out. I guess the fear of never being hired again, because when you're young, you want to keep getting jobs.
Of course.
You know, now I don't care. I can say anything and like, if it's the last job, it's the last job. But back then, we really cared about building a career. And so when you're in a writer's room, you're there all day long with these people, eating multiple meals. And everything comes up about like, hey, what did you do this weekend? And I couldn't say what I had done or who I was hanging out with. And there would be, you know, sometimes some gay jokes that were derogatory, and you just had to, you know, just pretend like you didn't hear it and change the subject.
Thank
and
goodness
so
times have changed.
They have changed a lot, but there's still a fear as far as content about doing shows about LGBTQ+. Yep. And we found that with a sitcom pilot we wrote called Silver Foxes, which was kind of a gay men's Golden Girls. And no network would make the show because they said it was too old and because it was LGBTQ characters.
Interesting.
And we just didn't understand it. So we have turned it into a play, and we did it in Dallas, and about to do it in Ohio, and hopefully New York one day.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll get to see that for sure then.
Definitely.
So going back to some of the other shows you worked on, you also worked on Roseanne, and you tell this story in the book about being handed a T-shirt on, I think it was the first day of rehearsal. Yes.
So writers, we have a couple months where you're just working on stories, but then you get to the first day of filming, and then all of a sudden there's Roseanne. And it's like, we were told, don't let her see the whites of your eyes because she could fire you.
Right.
So I always found the tallest camera person and stood behind them. And then they said Tom Arnold was her then husband, and Tom's like yelling, all writers get in line, and they had a box of T-shirts. And they had numbered 21 shirts because they had 21 writers at that point. And they wanted us all to get a number so they wouldn't have to learn our name, so they could point and say, number 8, you're fired.
Oh my gosh.
All I cared about was my birthday's October 13th. I had to get number 13 T-shirts, so I'm like pushing people aside. And the writers are furious. How dare you? And that's so demeaning.
Yeah.
I didn't care. I just wanted the 13. Once I got the 13, I was like, oh my God, this is a horrible thing to do. But I have the 13 shirt, and I've worn it twice. Once was during the last picket for the WGA strike. We were out front of the old studio where we shot Roseanne.
Wow. So we have to talk about the Gilmore Girls.
We have to.
And there's a funny thing about this, because my daughter loves that show.
What team is she on?
That's a good question.
Team Logan, she better be.
Well.
No, she's not? Uh-oh.
Anyway.
Yes.
She loves it, she watches it, she rewatches it. She was not born when that show went on the air. But there's something enduring about some of these shows.
The New York Times said it was the number 6th watched show in 2023. It's been off the air for like 20 years. It's just something about the storytelling.
So interesting.
I think Amy Sherman Palladino created it, and she comes from sitcoms. We met her on Roseanne. It has the style of a sitcom in that there's an arc to scenes, and there's always a little joke at the end.
Yeah.
And in our shows, it's normally not like that. Also, what Amy did was so beautiful. She would plant seeds in one episode that would grow into a whole story like way down the way. And I love that kind of storytelling. Usually in most shows, a story pops up and closes within that half hour or hour. So I love that it was like real life. It was kind of serialized.
Right, because our life doesn't go that way. It doesn't.
No, I wish some stories would end after 23 minutes.
Yes. It was interesting in the book you said that writing for Gilmore Girls, the characters speak so quickly that there was way more pages than what
like we're doing now.
Typical.
Yes. Normally it's 60 pages, so you think of 1 minute per page. We wrote 90 pages of script. So Amy loved the idea of those 40s movies, you know, with like Rosalind Russell, where they talked really, really fast. So she was patterning it after that. Again, that was not a style you had ever seen in television. But the actress had to learn every single word. She's one of those people like Aaron Sorkin. You come on set, you know every word, every comma. You don't get that right. Well, stop the take and no, I put a comma there for a reason. So when I coach actors, I tell them to really honor the words. And as a writer, I write like music. So I think of it that way. When I direct, I see myself almost conducting it. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
That is really interesting. And you modeled some of the writing on the relationships that you saw between your grandmother and your mother and your sister for that show, is that right?
I didn't really realize it until I'd only seen the pilot, and then when we got the job, it was for season 5. And I think it was like a Wednesday or Thursday, and they said, no, you're starting Monday. And I'm like, wait, what? So back then, there were not DVDs, or you couldn't watch it, you couldn't binge anything. these boxes came from Warner Brothers of cassettes. And as I'm seeing the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter, I'm like, wait a minute, this sounds very familiar, this relationship.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I can really lean into the relationship I saw between my grandmother, my mother, and my sister.
So let's talk about some of the other women in your life, because the book is also very much about your mom, and you were very, very close to your mom. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Without crying, probably not. You know, I'm sure most people have dealt with grief, and it's really been, it's a tough road. I mean,
I know.
Everyone has a different path with it, and there's great days, and then there's days when it's still really rough. She was my biggest cheerleader. It was really difficult to not have her there, but a way that I've kind of dealt with it is that, because she would always come to my plays and want to sit in the Queen Mum seat, the first row,
yeah.
or even at the studio tapings, she'd always sit in the front of the bleachers and kind of wave like the Queen Mum to everybody. And so now I like to think wherever I do a play, no matter what state or city, that she has the best seat in the house to see it. So.
That's a great way to think of it.
And
Stan.
I also think I talk to her more now than I did before, you know, because I can just, whenever I want, just throw a question and it comes back in her voice, which is really interesting.
Wow.
Most people go, I'm a little worried about you, Stan. But I love that I can still talk to her.
I think it's great.
Keep her close to my heart.
And I know that you were raised in Detroit,
yes.
as was I,
yes.
Michigander.
There we go, yeah.
You said in the book that you were bullied a bit as a kid, but the theater really turned things around for you.
Yes, it was very difficult for me to go to school and, you know, to be honest, to be spit on and called horrible names.
I'm sorry.
And then I would go to Cranbrook Theater School in the summer, and I was the most popular kid.
Right.
So for a young mind to think, why in one environment am I hated and ridiculed, in another I'm lifted up? And my mother would pick me up from Cranbrook and like everyone's screaming, bye Stan, can't wait to see you tomorrow, and they're all like at the car. And she was so happy to see me accepted and to find my tribe, as I like to call them.
Yeah, and it was a really meaningful juncture for you.
Yes, and then finally in high school, I also let my hair go into a Jew-fro. I think that had something to do with it. But I let it go natural, and it was more me. And then all of a sudden, I became popular and started starring in plays in school and became the president of our thespian society. Yes.
I'm glad to hear it.
Still remain friends with a lot of those people from high school.
Good. So going back to your career and reading the book, there was this theme that really stuck out for me, which was this sense of a roller coaster. Like 1 minute you're at the top of the entertainment mountain, and the next you don't know how you're going to pay your bills.
Yeah.
And that especially comes through, Stan, because you include in the book journal entries. And I think if I have this right, they date back to 1980.
It started at NYU. My modern dance teacher, why a dance teacher would ask us to journal, but she had us journal, and then she said, give me your journals.
Huh.
And then she lost them.
Oh my gosh.
So somewhere in New York here, maybe it's in one of these books, are my journals from my junior year at NYU. And then in senior year, we did it again, and those she kept, and she did give back to us. But it got me into the habit of journaling.
And so you include those journals in the book, and we get this real sense of what the experience is like for you because of
then and there. And I journaled all during all those shows.
Yes.
Those intense times and the fears of being fired or this happened, and you know, all the twists and turns of a career in show business.
What would your advice be for people who aspire to have a career like yours?
Keep going, keep reinventing yourself, be quizzical and interested in life. I'm always just, now with social media, I'm just taking it all in. I remember talking to Lily, I'm going to drop some names now, I'm sorry. It just happens.
You go ahead.
But those are the people I work with, so
okay.
I can't change the names. But I was out to dinner with Lily Tomlin and Jane Wagner, her partner. And Jane was saying, we consume media all day. They have like just a bank of TVs like in the newsroom. And that's how I think she stayed so relevant and fresh. And so for me, it's always listening to new music, going to theater all the time. I've always come back to New York multiple times a year, wishing I could live here again, since I left New York after a year of college. It
was interesting to me in the book also that I found it surprising that so many writers, even successful writers, are working on things that never see the light of day. And that has to be somewhat demoralizing.
It's, you can make a full career and then never have any projects done. I mean, more back in the day, they would spend a lot of money on movies and so many pilots that we have written, and then they would just toss them aside. I feel nowadays they are asking, well, what other material do you have? And I go, just wait a second. And I open my computer, and I've got like tons of ideas and shows, and so I still want to, you know, hopefully some of them will get made, but that's just the career that you do.
That's the way that it goes, right?
That's the way that it goes, and be able to ride that and still find the joy in it. I have a lot of friends that they will sell a pilot idea, and already that day, well, it's never going to happen. I go, you sold a pilot. Like, live in the joy of the moment.
Stan, I have a final question for you. You say in the book that writing for wonderful women has made you a better man. How so?
I think it's just kept me grounded. It's kept me very sensitive. And although I couldn't fit into your shoes, I do, and they're beautiful shoes,
Thank you.
by the way. It's enabled me to get a sense of how it feels for other people. And I think that's an important lesson, not just in writing, but in the world today. We're so easily in each different sides, but finding empathy and just to get a sense of what you might be going through. I will never know fully what it's like to walk in your shoes, but I can get a sense of a little bit of like how that must be, and I feel like it makes me a richer person.
Thank you so much for all this time. What a pleasure it's been.
Nice to meet you.
It was so nice to meet you. And I love our, you know, joint Detroit roots.
I know. Always and forever.
Yes. Thank you. Now to another edition of The Fine Print. Today we are talking about romance, a genre that has long been popular, but that doesn't mean it's entirely predictable. Jayashree Kamblé, professor of English at LaGuardia Community College, is also the president of the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance, and she's here with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Carol Anne. I'm so happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. So let's start with kind of a basic question, Jayashree. How would you define the romance novel? Meaning, what are the must-have elements?
So the romance novel and the form that I study, which is a 20th century mass market romance form, is about courtship, and it's about love, and it's about usually a couple figuring out how to live happily ever after with each other.
How popular is the genre right now?
The genre has always been very popular, and it feels like its popularity is getting a lot more visibility, especially because of social media. So it's always been very popular if you ask librarians, if you ask booksellers, if you ask readers. But now what we see on social media is an explosion in people recognizing individual titles and individual authors in a way that maybe wasn't quite so obvious before.
And what's interesting about romance is that it is no longer a one-size-fits-all proposition. Maybe it never was. But talk to me a little bit about the stories that are being told, the characters that are represented in today's romance novel.
So there's always been a lot of different subgenres in romance. And that essentially means that while the core of the story is about love between usually two people, there've always been these subplots that determine what else is going on. So you might have romantic suspense where there's a murder mystery, or you might have fantasy elements where there's dragons and sorcery, or you might have a hospital setting, so you see medical mystery. So there's always been these different forms of it. And my argument in my latest book about romance heroines is that all of these subgenres tend to show us that readers want the heroine to be acting in areas other than just the purely personal romantic life.
And many more diverse and queer stories being told.
Absolutely, which we're delighted by. So for the longest time, it was certainly a form that starred white protagonists, and it had settings that were usually the UK or the US, fairly limited in that sense. And they were definitely straight romances. And so while lesbian romance has certainly been something that sort of existed in the publishing industry, the mass market popular romance form and the big publishers had never mainstreamed it in the way that we're seeing in the last 20 years. So we're seeing characters now that identify as gay, that identify as lesbian, that identify as, in some cases, asexual. And so we're getting to see lots of exciting new stories and allowing ourselves to understand that a happy ever after can be so broad.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of talk right now about, speaking of subgenres, this romantasy, which is a combination of romance and fantasy. I know that it was somewhat fueled by Book Talk, the book lovers on TikTok. Can you explain that for us?
So romantic fantasy has always been a genre that's been around, but since we live in a hashtag universe, someone squeezed those two things together, and that's where we get the term romantasy. And so Book Talk, where a lot of the sort of hashtag fueled virality happens, that's where the term has become really popular and been picked up by the media. But there's always been a subset of the genre where you deal in plots that don't necessarily sort of commit to the kind of realism that you will see where everything is identifiable and fits our laws of physics.
As you've mentioned, romance has been popular for a long time, but what is it? Why? Why is it so fundamentally appealing to readers?
My sense that romance is really, really popular because it's about the triumph of folks who are otherwise marginalized and minoritized in our society. And traditionally, that's been the female protagonist. And so I've been arguing that what we're seeing in romance novels over the last century, but certainly in the last 40 years or so, is that the woman gets to win, not just in love, but she gets to win in terms of her economic life, in determining her own gender presentation, and whether that implies that she's competent at certain things or not, in terms of like the sexual scripts that she's willing to take on and the kinds of sexual activity that she can declare that she likes. And certainly in terms of like her community and her citizenship identity, where does she belong? That she gets to determine that in romances. So
interesting. Nonetheless, romance has had a bit of a mixed reputation over the years. What would you say about that?
I think that by and large, romance has sort of, especially in this form, has sort of risen at a time when we had very conflicted feelings about sexuality and women's rights in general. And so I think romance tends to sort of evoke all kinds of mixed responses from people, especially if those topics make you uncomfortable. And then when you match that against the rise of feminism and the potential belief that romance and sexuality is inevitably tied to women's subjugation, that created its own sort of response. And so romance has always been in the middle of a storm of different debates about what's the right way for a woman to be.
And also, don't you think there's a bit of people sort of look down on the romance novel as not high literature?
Yeah, so romance again has been one of those forms, like many mass market forms, that has been trapped in that argument between highbrow and lowbrow literature and culture. And so again, because of a combination of its being about women's lives, which already sort of fundamentally gets treated as not valuable, as not worthy of the great thought and the great philosophy and the great understanding of the human mind, and then you add in things like it's the mass market, so if everybody enjoys it, could it really be something that I, with my cultural capital, can claim?
Right, that's so interesting. I love the context you frame that in. Yeah. So Jayashree, what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions then about romance readers?
Well, misconceptions about romance readers tend to range from things like, many of them are just, I say that in quotes, housewives, that they don't have a strong intellectual trajectory in their lives, that they are only reading in order to escape from things that are maybe not that meaningful in their everyday aspects. There are myths about the writers of romances never actually writing anything interesting or creative or original or having any literary style of their own. So it can go on and on.
But you spend a lot of time dispelling those myths, don't you?
I do. I think it's partly because I've read romance novels for such a long time and I've looked at them so closely and so deeply. And I know a lot of romance readers. I've been in book clubs in many, many places. I talk to folks through part of my research. And so I understand that a lot of that mythology has nothing to do with the reality of who reads and who writes them and what's in them.
Great, very interesting. Thanks so much for all your time, Jayashree.
My pleasure.
It was great to have you.
Thank you.
Next up, author and columnist Linda Stasi is back with her always uncensored book reviews. As usual, she has plenty to say about what she's reading.
I'm not even a little ashamed to say loud and proud that I have been a true crime buff since it was considered trashy. True crime buffery has come a long way since then. It's kind of akin to like the way that people used to be humiliated if their nudie pics went public, and now they're humiliated if the nudie pics don't even go viral. I've been such a fan of crime and all its grime that I even became friends with arguably the best true crime writer of the 20th century, the late great Anne Riddell. Now that true crime has become not just accepted, but often considered literary, the genre has become like the Bloomsbury set of murder. The books, though, are mostly written by investigative reporter types, not often by a journalist who lived the crime because it was committed by his lifelong best friend. The Best Minds by Jonathan Rosen is a beautifully written, often lyrical telling of how he and his best friend, Michael Lauder, grew up in New Rochelle, were in trouble together, played basketball together, and both even ended up going to Yale. Lauder, however, graduated summa cum laude in 3 years. His star just kept rising up until it flew so high that it and he crashed to earth. Lauder had become delusional and very dangerous. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he did have bouts of medical sanity, and because of his brilliance was lauded as a poster boy for how to handle debilitating mental illness. But neither the meds nor the sanity lasted, and Michael ended up committing a murder so horrendous that even the cops on the scene were forever changed by the experience, including physically. Written with love, compassion, and insight, this is not, repeat not, your average formulaic slash dash trial dash justice served, but a brilliant, heartbreaking true tale filled with good intentions and tragic outcomes. Meantime, Strong Passions by Barbara Weisberg is not a true crime tale, but a true tale of a scandalous divorce in old New York and in the highest society. In the 1860s, a young, well-placed daughter of wealth, Mary Strong, who was disappointed by her marriage, not only strayed, but strayed into the arms of her husband's brother. Mary had an abortion, and remember, this was back in the 1860s. Then she ran away with her youngest daughter before the divorce court drama began, and its sordid details were spread out all over the newspapers. Her husband, Peter, was left with the other daughter. Although the book sometimes gets tangled in the weeds a little bit, it's still a very good read. And I mean seriously, a hot affair between in-laws of two prominent and wealthy families, abortion, divorce, courtroom drama, and the limited rights of women in one book? It's like the Real Housewives of very old New York, but without the table tossing or the artificial leg throwing. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That is our show for today. Thanks so much for watching. A quick reminder to check us out on social media. We'd love to hear from you and tell us what you're reading. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.